I am a police officer in the United States of America, and I've been a patrol officer for just under 10 years. Each story that I tell is my story and mine alone. Everybody has their own experiences. These are mine. Now, it's no surprise that people are afraid of guns. They're afraid of bullets, they're afraid of bullet wounds, they're afraid of getting shot. But I can tell you that what scares me the most are knives, machetes, swords, because even though a bullet travels so fast you'll never see it, you'll definitely never see it coming. There's something extremely scary about someone only 20 feet away running at you with a knife or a machete that's dull but sharp enough to hack away and permanently dismember you, permanently disable you. Just do a quick Google search on cops attacked with knives. Personally, I would rather be shot, but haven't experienced either. So in this call, Man with the Machete, I was called to Midtown of the city that I live, to an apartment building where a gentleman was wielding a machete, destroying windows and property on the outside of the apartment building. Now, the apartment building was set up as a 3-story with the doors to the apartment on the outside, with balconies and staircases that went all the way across, with the staircases at the end of each side. He lived on the second floor, all the way to the left, right in front of a staircase. When I arrived on scene, I arrived with one more officer, and the disturbance had already been separated, and the man with the machete was already back in his apartment. We got initial information from the owner and the initial complainant, who stated the man with the machete began destroying things when a maintenance man had told him prematurely that he was going to be evicted. Now, I talked to this maintenance man, who was an older gentleman, and there was something so rude that he rubbed me the wrong way. It was almost like he was happy that this person escalated so much out of control that now this was happening. Instead of allowing the owner to tell him that he was being evicted, instead, the maintenance man going up and servicing the apartment was like, "Hey man, by the way, we're about to serve you papers and kick you out." It just, the pleasure that he got from doing that and then escalating the situation, to me, again, just rubs me the wrong way. Now, after we responded to the apartment, after we had contacted the complainant and the maintenance man, we went to go contact the individual with the machete. Now, he was inside of his apartment. We didn't know if he had the machete still at the time, but what we did was we went upstairs, assessed the damage. There's multiple windows broken, to include his own on the outside of his apartment, also windows in the staircase since it's outside, and we went to go knock on the door. The other officer stood off to the side while I made contact in something called first light. First light is when a door cracks open, and when the door opens up, imagine someone standing at the hinge of the door, and if the door opens up and light would peek through, it would hit you. That's what's called first light. So I made contact, the gentleman opened the door, and he was standing in the utter darkness of his apartment. Now, this apartment, I later found out, was an efficiency style apartment or a studio apartment. So the living room is also the bedroom. The kitchen is attached to the single room, and it's an open floor plan with a single bathroom in the back. Now, he had the shades drawn, but the windows were broken out. And when he opened the door, it was complete and utter darkness in there. Now, he stood slightly behind the door so I couldn't see him, and he engaged with us momentarily before shutting the door again. Now, this got me sort of on edge. It got my spider senses tingling, and I sort of stepped back into the staircase. Now, I wasn't right next to the door, but I was so close that I felt uncomfortable. After he opened the door, and I felt like I was exposed. So I stepped back into the staircase, and the other officer sort of stepped back further towards the adjacent apartment or the neighboring apartment next to him. We eventually called for backup for at least one more officer because things could get out of hand extremely quickly, especially with someone who's damaging property with a machete, whether he's calmed now or not, and we did not want it to escalate into a lethal force situation. So we called several other officers, and another officer had arrived, and we chose to go lethal and non-lethal. So we had moved down the staircase. He was on taser, I was on pistol, and we just watched the door as we tried to make announcements for him to come out. Eventually, we had the building surrounded. We had about 15 officers there. As things escalated and grew out of control, so did he. We covered our areas to protect ourselves. I eventually moved all the way down to the first level of the staircase. So if he were to come down, he'd have to come down the initial staircase onto the landing, then another staircase to get to us. Now, we held that position while a negotiator and several other officers on the upper landing tried to talk him out of the apartment and give up civilly. Well, eventually what happened was he would come out and he would wave his machete around, screaming, and he'd be yelling that he's not going anywhere. We're going to have to come in and get him. Now, this is one of the closest moments that I've ever been to shooting someone while on duty. There was only one other time before this, and that was while chasing a stolen vehicle. It was rammed by another officer. I'll end up telling the story in the future, and the vehicle was disabled, and the driver had immediately got out, drawn a gun, and started running. And I was the first officer on scene who chased him down. Now, that was first the closest point that I've ever been to almost shooting someone until this day. Now, he did walk up and down the first initial staircase, and I'd already made a plan with the other officer that if he rounded the corner, there was no commands. He was already being commanded by the officers upstairs. If he rounded the corner, then he was to deploy his taser. If he somehow fought through the taser and continued down the staircase with a machete in his hand, then I would be forced to use lethal force. Now, as he made his way down the staircase, we tried to get him to stop. We gave him verbal commands. He sat down on the staircase and then stood back up, started to walk down to the initial landing, and my finger was off the trigger, but it's one of those things where it only takes a split second for things to change. Definitely, it was scary. Now, as he stopped on the initial landing, the other officer felt like he didn't have a good enough spread for his taser to actually affect a lockup. Now, the way tasers work is they're not really painful. What they do is they shoot out probes that cause a neural lockup through electricity. So if that lockup doesn't occur and people are still able to move and function, then it's failed. If you don't have a wide enough spread on the probes, then there's no lockup and it's failed. So he felt like he didn't have a wide enough spread or an opening on a different section of the body to shoot the lower probe. So he did not engage. He wanted to wait till he rounded the corner a little bit more. Now, thank God, this guy listened to our commands. Eventually, he sat down on the staircase, very upset, and he laid the machete down, walked back up into his apartment. We ended up getting the machete, but unknown to us, he had more machetes in the apartment because eventually he came out with another machete and SWAT was called out. They used a 40 millimeter sponge round first in an attempt to get him to drop the machete. And then eventually SWAT used something called an Arwin, which is a 40 millimeter semi-automatic non-lethal kinetic launcher that launches baton rounds, which are basically plastic rounds. And eventually when the canine officer got there, The sound of the dog barking and whining to get into that apartment and get a bite was enough for him to give himself up. Now, these are stories that happen all over the United States. People are amped up. They get extremely upset, extremely emotional. They're not able to use their logic side of the brain, and it's fight or flight. Just like any counselor or any therapist will tell a husband, a wife, a boyfriend or girlfriend, or partners that if they're arguing, if they're screaming at each other, there's no way they'll ever get to resolve their situation until both separate and then come back after they've calmed down at a later date. Normally they say the next day, at the very least a few hours later, because physiologically your heart is racing, your mind is out of control, your blood pressure's up, and physically you are in that fight or flight, and that's exactly what this guy was in. I would have hated to have had to end someone's life because they were upset over a maintenance man making a comment about him getting kicked out. Now, yes, this was in the time of COVID, and this still is in the time of COVID if you're listening to this during COVID. However, it wasn't lack of payment that had this emergency order to evict this man within 7 days. Normally, it's a 30-day eviction. Well, he was being aggressive towards neighbors. He was damaging property. He was damaging the fire alert equipment, all the fire alarms around the apartment, and he just had to go. He was causing too many issues, too many safety issues, and clearly there was a mental health issue there as well. Now, one of the things that I've really come to learn over my years is that sometimes a lot of these are mental health issues, and the system is absolutely broken, not in my state, but all over the country when it comes to mental health. So just keep in mind that this is just a normal Tuesday, maybe a Thursday. Trust me, the day after this day was a similar call, but instead of a machete, it was a knife. Now, my goal of this channel is to humanize the badge. I want you to understand where officers are coming from. I want you to hear the stories of the day-to-day. Now, I know this may seem extreme, this guy with a machete, or coming across a homicide victim, or rushing in and trying to save a baby and doing CPR on an 18-month-old, or whatever you think. But these really are the week-to-week and day-to-day things that happen in sometimes larger cities or towns that have a lot of crime. So again, my goal is to try to humanize police. I want you to see where they're coming from. We also have families that we have to go home to. And if you're still listening to this video, I want to thank you for listening to the video. I hope that you guys will subscribe to the channel. My goal is to try to release more videos, one a week. Sometimes I get behind, work and family and my other channels sort of take precedent, but it's really nice to be able to get on this channel, release some of this stuff that I have on my shoulders, get it out to you guys so you know sort of what we go through on the day-to-day. So again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.